Welcome back to the AI Summit, Day 2, Mid-Funnel. I'm your host, Julian Inchinsky, joined by my co-host, Justin Michael, and we're deeply grateful to all of the amazing speakers, analysts, and sponsors who have played a crucial role in making this summit possible. We'll kick off our panel today with one and only Seth Morris from Forrester, who has been an amazing partner to this show and predictor of AI trends for sales. Seth, how have you been? What's new?
Very good. Well, there's not much going on, not in the tech space these days. Uh, just a little bit. Lots of fun stuff. Looking forward to talking to this group. One of the cool things about doing these is getting to talk to this level of people that are deeply embedded in it. I learn more than they do, I'm sure.
Amazing. Well, we hope that the live will be working on the website now, because yesterday we had thousands of people hit the website simultaneously. And as was like to be, it's always interesting. So yeah, I'm going to be taking care of that. And Seth, back to you. Take us off.
Right. So I did expect we're going to talk a lot more about the future than I think today, because I think the first question that I want to ask around that is that the right thing to do? Like, well, I'll give you my perspective, and I'd like to hear what you guys think. So, what I see in a lot of situations is a lot of people talking about doing things at the qualification level, and I think it's natural to have a pretty standard progression into the BDR SDR role because they play a big part in this and it's a big area of disruption. So we'll touch on that a lot. But how are you seeing technology today in its true impact compared to where it's going to be? Because that's one of the things that's been disorienting for me is there's a lot more talk about where it's going, because I think anybody who looks at this stuff looks at it and goes, wow, I can see step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I think also when I deal with clients and they start actually using it, they can't do step 2, 3, 4, and 5. They're at step 1. So it has utility, but it doesn't necessarily have the utility that they envisioned yet. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Are we there already? Is this like start now, build? What are your guys' thoughts?
I'll start. I think we're not there yet, but I don't think it's going to take long. And I think it is going to be truly disruptful to all of sales. I think that with the AI, I mean, we're using, and our customers are using voice language conversion already. That is perfect. I can take my voice, record a demo using our tool, and I can convert it to any language with perfect accent, and you would never know that it wasn't me, that I didn't actually speak those languages. If you can now convert that to AI with everything in your database, all your case studies, everything, and you have this AI bot that can chat to someone, right? We know that 87% of the sales process is not done with you talking to them. It's them doing work behind the scenes. And so getting them the right information at the right time and better, having it be much more qualified and better qualified by the time it actually gets to anybody. I just think that's gonna replace, it's going to change our jobs in a significant way because AI is going to be able to do it so much better and so much more efficiently.
It's kind of funny you say I could translate my language into another language seamlessly, and everyone's like, what's next?
What's next? What's next is AI. What's next is AI doing that. So it's not actually me that actually recorded anything. It's me, my face, my voice in any language with an entire data set of everything my company knows and can do. And you ask it anything, and it's a full, perfect conversation with the exact right messaging at the right time.
Oh, you're talking autonomous, so agentic type stuff where I'm just replicating you. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the future, in the near future, you're not even going to need a real person, and you're not going to know if you're talking to a real person or not.
So I'd like to say that I think the key there is what knowledge base is that working on, because when it comes to the nuanced pieces, so it's all good in the beginning, right? It's all good for the things that are standard. But what happens when there's an anomaly? And an anomaly is usually coming from some human level of interaction that a machine can't handle. And we are actually quite a ways from the movies. There's going to be some time before there are AI that can handle those bits of nuance. So your best bet is to have well-defined rubrics and information inside of your knowledge base that can help to push information one way or the other when there are things that don't look the same. But what you won't be able to do is handle some of the intricate details that I think are required for trust and rapport building. So send me a bot, I'm not buying. Right. It may get through that first conversation, but I'm not putting my credit card in on the bot. Right? It's going to take me a minute to understand. Now, can the bot help to take care of some of the pre-qualification steps? Maybe, right? If the company has spent enough time developing their knowledge base. But other than that, I think that we're a ways from a machine adequately selling services.
Yeah, I'm going to co-sign kind of with Tisha, what you just mentioned. And what I'll say around that is, for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, sales technology, revenue technology, it seems like has been built in order to optimize for the sales person, to optimize for the sales process. And we have completely lost sight of optimizing for the buyer and the buyer process. And we've created such a terrible experience for buyers that it's caused this enormous skill gap for sellers. They, like salespeople, very often, they don't know how to engage. They don't know how to do the nuanced stuff. They don't know how to sell well because they haven't had to. They've been able to optimize to play a numbers game that they've just repeated over and over and over again. And my fear is that if we as technologists, as tech people, are continuing to use technology that further removes the human from the buying process, we're just going to irritate buyers more than they're already irritated. So I'm afraid of moving entirely in that direction. I think that AI can and should be super useful to codify best practices for the research, for the synthesis, for the things that can happen behind the scenes. But when it comes to the actual engagement with a buyer, Tisha, I could not agree more. You send a bot my way, you see through it in a second, you lose faith immediately, you move on to the next company. There's no shortage of next companies to move on to. So yes, engage with AI. Yes, use AI where possible, but don't outsource everything to AI. You're going to lose the trust of the buyers. And that's what sales ultimately is. It's human psychology and it's human trust. And if we allow that to erode, we're doing ourselves a major disservice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, sorry,
go ahead, Brandy.
Oh, I was just going to say it's funny because I'm a big fan of metaphors, and I'm also going to get on this bandwagon because humans are still very much relationally the secret sauce in making the gourmet recipe of closing your six-figure or higher deals, and AI is the kitchen assistant. So I am a-okay with it, chopping, measuring, preparing ingredients, surfacing intelligence, doing repetitive tasks, and providing valuable data. But I think that it's the chef, and that's the human BDR, the AE, or in many enterprise level in B2B SaaS areas, the thought leaders or the folks like, Kyle, myself, anyone who's sitting with that economic buyer that brings creativity, intuition, personal flair. Because we still buy from humans, right? We're still buying from humans that will delight both existing customers and prospects. And I think that the assistant helps for sure. And it's there, but that chef is the one who curates it and ties that together. And I think in a lot of ways makes it an unforgettable buying experience, which to Kyle's point has really drastically eroded over the past, I would say 2.5 years for sure.
Yeah.
So like just kind of, oh, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, sounds like summary, we are all in general agreement that SDRs, BDRs have been the unsung hero in the sales process. I don't think the role will disappear, but certainly will evolve. Right. The AI will help raising the bar for every company, and the best practices will be more likely to more learned by everybody throughout the same company, but also in the industry. So AI really raises the bar, but it's not going to replace human. In the end, B2B sales is still very much about relationship building. When we talk about AI, I always think about AI means authentic intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think a really great way of thinking about it, sort of double clicking there, is that the AI is great at answering questions that you have. And it saves so much time, both from a prospect and both from, an XDR perspective, but it doesn't solve problems yet. or it doesn't solve your important business problems with the nuance needed. And I don't know if people will ever get to a point where they're going to actually trust AI to solve business problems. We're going to want to talk to experts, people who have been there before. So yeah, I always think, for those answering questions, it can do that so well. And that's not a good use of an XDR's time anyway. We want them solving business problems. And that's where the lack of nuance just gets you every time.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking mid funnel, oh, go ahead, Jacob. I keep jumping in.
I was going to just say that I think from we're not there yet from both like a knowledge perspective and a technology perspective. I think when you think about let's use like the SDR, for example, I think the data is so unstructured and context is king. And I think that's why we're starting to see like thousands and thousands of posts on LinkedIn of like, this is so obviously AI reaching out to me, right? Because the AI, they're used like on the back end, it's really looking at like keywords and stuff like that. And it's not understanding the context behind the outreach. And then I think everyone had all these promises. And I think from a knowledge gap perspective, people haven't really nailed prompting yet either, right? So I think you have this knowledge gap of how do I build the right prompt, and you have this technological gap of how do I understand the context of this large unstructured data set to deliver the right messaging at the right time. So I think what you're left with is a bunch of poorly engineered prompts and lack of context and why we're reaching out, which I think leads to a lot of distrust in AI today. I think we're going to get there eventually. But I think there's a lot of gaps that we are going to have to narrow and kind of build trust back up, because I think everyone saw AI, they jumped full speed ahead into it, and they got hurt.
So if I were to sum this up, because if you go like top of funnel into mid funnel and we're down in qualification, I mean, I think the key thing everyone's saying right now is you can't take your hand off the steering wheel at this point in time. It may be able to make you more efficient, but no way you're going to let a deal that you probably paid good money for to get to the qualification point be completely left alone with AI. Mm-hmm. And it even sounds like as a group, you guys are thinking it's never going to be just completely left alone to a certain degree. Is that a fair statement?
Never maybe is overstating this, because God knows, got it, but never.
Yeah, who knows?
The usefulness that I see, Seth, is like you look at, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this as well. You've been looking through the close lost reasons that the reps always provide, and without exception, and maybe your experience has been different than mine, it's radio silent or lost contact, or something that's kind of a BS close loss reason. They don't actually know why they're losing deals. So where can AI be helpful here? It's not reading transcripts and telling us what the real close loss reason is. That's not it. If that was in the transcript, the rep would know and they'd put that information in. Where AI can help is it can codify the process of what the best reps do to not allow radio silence to happen. So after the first meeting happens, we could have an AI workflow that finds the other members of the buying group, adds them as contacts, and writes bespoke emails to them based on the context that was shared in the first demo meeting to engage the 10 people instead of single threading with the one person. Now that maybe isn't like deal qualification, but it's a best practice that the top % of reps actually do. 2%, 5%, maybe. But if we can codify that, if we can outsource that work to AI and just make sure that the right things are happening at different deal stages, that is how we're going to further qualify deals. That is how we're going to actually understand what's working and what isn't. And to me, that, at least right now, Seth, is the right way to put AI to work. I know I sound like a broken record, but I really want to hammer the point home. It's the codification of the best practices that you wish your reps were doing, that they aren't. And no matter how many 90-minute enablement sessions you set up to beg and plead for them to do these things, they're not going to. Like, with the results are in, they're not going to. But you now have AI that's able to do these really complex workflows that are multi-step, that are actual complex processes that your reps should be doing, but don't have time for, or haven't thought of, or don't do, or whatever. And that to me is where we are right now with AI. And the companies that are doing this well, they're actually seeing their best practices get extended across their entire sales force. And the lift is unbelievable, because of course it is, because they're best practices. So it's a different way of thinking about enablement to me, where the strategy is still defined by the human, but the execution of that strategy is largely outsourced to AI. And then there's human QA on the back end to go and further the execution and make sure that there's a human element in the rest of the sales cycle.
And something you just said, Kyle, that I really, really like and I think is important is that you said, the human monitoring the AI. Because I think sometimes lost in the conversation is when people be like, oh, we'll let the AI go wild. We don't let people go wild. We still monitor our people. We still look at what they're doing, and AI can make that so much easier. But this whole idea of AI being hands off, if we don't treat people as hands off, we don't treat ops as hands off, we don't treat, no matter what, there's still going to be so much work in monitoring the AI. And I also don't think that's necessarily going to be the easiest of work, that especially as the technology gets more complex, you get more things connecting, pulling from more data sources, use cases that we're probably only just, thinking about in years ahead, that's going to need more and more monitoring. And if anything, I do think it means an upskilling of the XDR as well as the AE in terms of being more technologist minded. How do you make these things connect together? For managers, it's going to mean how do you, pull these in? So it's really having almost everyone up level the AI skills, but you're always, again, we're not going to let humans loose without monitoring them. We're not going to do the same with AI.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
go ahead. Yeah, I agree with Kyle. I think like replication of behavior through workflows is like the best application of AI today. I think through it of like prompt logic and an execution or action, right? Where basically you're able to set up different parameters that stick on the closed loss reason, right? Being reps aren't actually taking that action and doing it. So if you're able to set up prompts or parameters to guide insights of like, hey, and the logic is maybe when the deal is closed lost in Salesforce, right? So being able to activate these workflows of, hey, when an action is taken, right, and it's Salesforce opportunity is marked closed lost, run this prompt over a series of customer interactions that take out this action of like filling a CRM field or selecting dropdowns, right? So I think from a complexity perspective of and being able to create these prompts, create these different workflows and actions based off of it is, I think, where we live today and is the best use of AI.
Yeah,
The
I was
workflow side of things.
Oh, okay.
From a workflow, yeah, perspective.
I was going to
yeah,
say,
I was going to add to Kyle's point about this is more about enablement. I agree. This is at this current stage. I think our focus usually is about the AI as a technology or the large language model always being used so often, but it is about enablement and the data. The sharing of best practices, codify them within the company, it's actually not that easy. And to also train the data set based on company proprietary best practices is easier said than done. When we look at large language model, and it's trained based on public data, but for enterprise AI deployment, we really need to train proprietary company best practices plus reference data set from reputable vendors with quality data, with practices that's unique. I think that's the key challenge. So it's a combination of how you really focus on the data quality aspect, as well as company specific best practices and codify that into the training data set so that AI assistant and eventually AI agent can be more effective.
But one of the things, thank you. So one of the things that we think are most important is one, to recognize that there's multiple versions of AI, right? Generative AI, the unsupervised learning model is great. There's still supervised machine learning, and there's something that we call decision intelligence, which is what our system uses. So you can take the time to pre-build cause and effect. That could be helpful in supporting a machine aiding in reasoning, not doing it, but at least getting the starting point. So I can bring an SDR further along. I can bring a BDR further along faster, right, by doing that. I can also build out what the causal inference should be so that the system can be smarter, faster. But that's still, again, going back to there's still a need. I'm so sorry. There's still a need for a human person to do the pre-work in order for that to even work. So I just think the data is one thing, but it's also the work behind the work, right? It's the work behind the machine that can aid in. So maybe I am a designer developer. I can help SDRs and BDRs be better by building out the cause and effect chains along the way that they will then use and then train the machine to do that work. But what's not going to happen is that it's just automatically going to show up and we're going to be using generative AI, the publicly available data, to do reasoning and do the kinds of levels of in-depth qualification that we're talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that makes total sense. And I think that the key part of this is it's going to be in tandem. It's not going to be I'm just turning it over to machine and everything's done for me. To a large extent, if a machine's talking to a machine, then you don't need people buying either. And this whole thing turns into a commoditized market and you don't need sellers. It keeps going from there. If we go back to the opportunity side, or the qualification piece, why are all these, it seems very clear that nobody thinks that these tools can replace the BDR or SDR or XDR or RDR. Why are there so many companies saying they can? And are there any that have merit? Like, what is the logic in saying I can replace your BDR today? I can replace your SDR today?
With respect to the companies that are working on doing this, they don't understand what an SDR does. They think that an SDR sends emails and books meetings, and they've created agents that send emails and book meetings. And they send thousands of emails, and they pick the low-hanging fruit, and they burn down the orchard. And so without exception, the feedback that I've heard from everybody who's tried this is they've gotten little blips of success. They burned their TAM to the ground, and the success fell off a cliff. Not at all surprising.
Yeah, no, I really agree. I think the only, and I was trying to think, preparing for this, like, is there any context where I could see just fully handing it over? Because, there are a lot of claims out there. And the only time I could really imagine a scenario where that was feasible is if you had an unlimited TAM. Maybe if it was, B2C, it was something, like Clorox during COVID, something where there's just like so much demand, it doesn't matter. People will either still jump through those hoops, or you just could sell to pretty much, anyone and it wouldn't matter. If you don't mind risking a lot of bad experiences because you just have that, small transactional, maybe $5 or $10, maybe then the cost of, these options. But how many companies are that have that unlimited TAM for such a low dollar amount? So yeah, on the one hand, never say never, but unless to Kyle's point, unless you're willing to burn your TAM to the ground, or unless you have such unlimited TAM, and again, Clorox during COVID, those are very, very unique situations. So not impossible, but I don't think that's the case for 99.9% of the people listening.
Yeah.
So it is a spectrum, right? So the closer to company who sort of incorporating product-led growth, then certainly the use of AI system probably is more likely to be successful. But most company going through the stages of move up market and to move towards a relationship selling with AI being the assistant. And then I think second, the AI as a technology is great at single channel activation. They're not quite good at coordination and then orchestration. When we talk about sales marketing alignment, usually we talk about orchestration across multiple channels. When we get to a stage, that could be very fast. Within the next year or two, we'll have procurement department, buyer side, have their buying agent interacting with vendors AI selling agent, and that orchestration is not mature enough. But this phenomena is everywhere. Just like the celebrity will say, "Hey, how are you doing? My people will call your people. We'll work it out." And so that world not too far away, but it's not mature enough.
Yeah, and I think what you've seen is that so many companies are making this promise and they're trying as fast as can to get to market. So they're coming to market with an overly simplified solution, which I think aren't taking certain things to account. Like what I've seen in the market, there's not like good validation rules, right? Like how do we leverage our Salesforce data to make sure that like the right people aren't getting reached out to? Another solution I saw was you had no ability to create your own prompts for the messaging and you were dropping your website URL in. I don't know about all of you, but I don't want my URL, my website to control my messaging to my entire market. So when you think about it through that lens where there's not the like robust ability to create validation rules to make sure that the right people or the wrong people aren't getting messaging, and then you're relying on data sets that you yourself wouldn't use for outreach, you left in a really hard position where a lot of people are getting mass emails with messaging that you don't want to send. And I think right now people are just trying to eat up market share because there's a million competitors, and they're not quite there yet. That's a solution.
And unfortunately, they're not really eating up market share, right? They're really just eating up space. Unfortunately, there's another component here, which is the market itself, and what people believe that they have to do to find a space in it. So you've got a company that's trying to seek venture capital backing, for example, because they think that that's the way that they're going to get somewhere. It doesn't matter what it is that they're building or making. They don't necessarily have 20, 30 years of expertise in it, you know, to know all of the nuanced specialties, but I need to go down this path in order to fulfill what I think is the need. So I think some of what we're seeing in the market in the space of all these tools has to do with that phenomenon too. So there's a market that is driving people to build things that they may or may not be experts in building versus people building things that they have expertise in, which would make a tremendous amount of difference.
People have been chasing the silver bullet to solve the outbound pipeline generation problem for as long as sales has been a thing. If there were a silver bullet, we would have found it by now. It does not exist, and anybody who says it does is lying to you. Now, these companies are able to get funding because it sounds glamorous. It sounds like a transformational leap for how sales teams are going to run. And it's all bullshit because people don't actually understand, to your point, Tisha, like the complexity that goes into it. So I could talk about this for hours. It's a passion of mine, but I will remove myself from the soapbox right now.
No, it's a razzle dazzle soft shoe and everyone's going to do it. It's like skinny tea or the gold rush or crypto. I don't know. Put it in the pile and watch it burn. And 18 to 24 months from now, it'll all be relabeled something else. So I agree with the concept that like what you see is not what you get. And if it was what you get, it would have been got. And it ain't there.
And I think it goes back to what we said at the beginning, where the people are still important, because all of our sets are from phone or, you know, video. It's where it's a real person. So I think the better conversation is, what are the tools out there that allow the SDRs to have those better conversations, to very quickly say, you know, what does Seth actually care about? So when I cold call him, I have something relevant and specific that he's actually going to care about. Like, what are those tools that are available that are going to help our SDRs be more effective and efficient?
You guys
you go ahead.
No, I think one thing I do want to say is I'm in general more optimistic. I do think the power of AI will help lift all boats sooner than we might anticipate. Part of it, I think, is when we deploy those, how do we get deeper adoption among the actual users? How do we build in this feedback loop within the AI application itself so that it improves in a non-linear fashion? Because at the heart of the Gen AI technology is not so much about the prompt, it's about the transformer, right? So the transformer is a self-learning kind of mechanism and then provide much better context. So I think that's kind of where we maybe, as technologists, we just building from a feature perspective. We don't sit down and think about how can we build in this feedback loop, both within the application, but also from an enablement perspective, from service perspective. But in general, I'm more optimistic. I think this will be one day we all wake up saying, well, the moment has arrived.
Tisha, do you want to finish this thought? And I'm going to move us on. Did you have a final thought on this one?
I'll leave it there. You can move us on.
So this is an AI session. We just spent 10 minutes bashing AI. So I'm gonna challenge you guys a little bit on this. Come on, why can't I eliminate inbound hand raisers? I should easily be able to eliminate inbound hand raisers and send it directly to my seller instead of having a BDR do it. And I'm paying all this money to my BDR team or my BDR SDR team to do this. Can I at least use AI to get rid of those so I stop having to pay so much money to just transition and make sure that it's qualified?
Yeah. Seth, to be fair, we spent the last 10 minutes bashing full AI agents, not AI. It's very, very different. So again, like yes, you can replace the automatic emails that are sent to an inbound lead. But again, speaking from experience, and you all are, I'm sure, in the same camp, what's the conversion rate of hand raisers? That's sub 10% via that first email touch, right? Now, demo requests, you may get, closer to 30 or 40% or whatever, but lower intent leads that come to an event or do something like that, there's still a human touch that's required. And I have seen a successful follow-up that's not just send the email, it's not just make the phone call, it's not just do the social touch, it's find the other members of that same company that are likely going to be involved in this deal and go reach out to all of them, engage 5 people instead of 1 and try and get a meeting that way. And like, that's the type of thing that seems maybe like it's marginal, but success in sales is marginal. And people who do the things at the margins are the people that are successful. So yes, you can outsource some of the follow-up, and yes, you can get the speed to lead down to 30 seconds, and you should. But thinking that that's going to be, again, your silver bullet that solves all of your out or your inbound conversion problems is a pipe dream, because converting inbound leads is way harder than many people who have never done the role before actually think it is.
I also believe you can increase efficiency quite a bit. We can help things to go faster. That's where we are. That doesn't mean that over time, what increased efficiency means is that there are fewer and fewer BDRs. That might be the case, or maybe you change the job, right, of the BDR or the SDR into a different role, right? Because you increase their knowledge base, they start to get upskilled by having the types of information that they have in front of them. So I do think that there's a transformation, right, for the workforce. Definitely faster, definitely more efficient, definitely a much easier way to upskill and train people so that they can take on different roles over time. But I think that without a tremendous amount of pre-work, right, the work that we're talking about, you can't get rid of the people. Somebody's still got to do that stuff, because the human interaction is the key to it all. So I think we're all kind of saying the same thing again and again, but it's kind of because it's the facts, right? And that doesn't bash AI. I have an AI company, right? I'm not here to bash AI. I am here to set realistic expectations for its capabilities. And truly anything that is new, and we know in the sales process, it's all about finding what new thing some company wants. Where's the unique value, right? We can't do that without the human perspective. That's not going to change anytime soon. So I just think that it's a moot point.
Yeah, I think it's
Let's take it in another direction, though. Okay, go ahead, Ollie, and then go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that, I thought what's a really great point is that it's not that, I think this is a real AI enthusiast panel here, but I think it's because by nature of our jobs, we're actually the ones in the weeds seeing how hard it is. And I think probably, a lot of us are at, parties or with our family, and they're like, well, aren't you worried about your job safety? I think we probably all get inundated. I was at one of my direct's birthday parties, and her dad literally pulled me over being like, is my daughter going to have a job soon? So I think we just get these questions a lot. And it's, again, I think just so much more of when you're in it, you see how hard it is to make it work. You see all of the potential in it. But I'm sure we also get, everyone here is like, well, why do you need writers? Just use ChatGPT. Or why do you need this? Just use Dolly. So I think this is probably a somewhat like emotionally scarred group that always, loves AI, but needs to make sure that people understand that there is work that goes into it.
Yeah, and I would argue that this is the most valuable part. Is I think that the consensus here is it can do amazing things, but be skeptical and go in with it to make it prove its value. It's not like any other tool where it's going to magically do what you want. It can do great things, but it needs to prove it can do great things in the product you buy. Then it's very worthwhile. Let me take another step with this, right? Because one thing that we moved to when I talked about the inbound pieces, you need a person to do it. And I think we all agree with that. Why can't the seller do it? Why do I need someone doing inbound qualification? Why can't the seller? I mean, we know way back when the reason this whole role existed is because sellers didn't do it. Well, now I have AI that should make it way simpler for them to have to do those things. What's the reason, or is there a way that a seller can use AI to do the qualification in tandem? Or do you still think that, and this could be a longer or short term, that an XDR, BDR, SDR is needed there versus empowering a salesperson and holding them accountable for more qualification level accountabilities?
Well, I think part of the qualification step is really this segmentation that requires data enrichment. From as simple as matching some, whether it's form submission or return user, that you can map to the right company, to the right division, the right buying group, then you can route it to the proper seller, or in some cases might be best to route to a AI agent, especially if it's a long tail, if it's in the wee hour, if you're solely US operating, but you have someone paying hand raiser for a very specific use case that's a good fit, but there's no human seller available. So I think it's a spectrum, but the first step of the qualification is really about the data enrichment, the segmentation, and then can route to the proper human or AI agent for the follow-up.
Good. Anyone else have a take on this?
Lead scoring. So I take my lead scoring, enhance it with artificial intelligence, but then do I still have to have a human in the loop for the anomalies, or is it, am I good to go if I'm utilizing it based on my pre-assigned rubrics and sort of the data management processes?
I keep thinking about the AESDR question there, and having managed both, particularly from the CMO perspective, is, I mean, I want my AEs closing deals. I don't want them prospecting. I want them negotiating terms. I want them managing these, complex deals, particularly in the enterprise end of the B2B SaaS world. And SDRs, on the other hand, I want them gathering. So it's hunter-gatherer, you know what I mean? It's like it's a division of church and state there, because they need to qualify. And again, we can use AI to augment but not replace and automate across that. But I really do, they're distinctly different roles. And this is, I think, part of people who haven't been an SDR and AE or haven't managed them directly or worked in that. There are a series of assumptions made from the outside. Just like anyone could look into a room of engineers and not know the difference between a data scientist and someone who is creating an LLM. They all look the same at the desk. So it must be the same from the outside. But those SDRs who are wonderful at what they're doing have a very sharp skill set for that initial set of engagement and education. And AEs who are excellent, they are great at deep relationship building and closing. And I think they're just distinctively different. You look at two dancers, one could be doing Martha Graham, the other one's doing Fosse. If you're not a dancer, you're not going to know. If you're not a buyer, you might not be able to see that. If you're on the outside creating a replacement AI to take over all of this, you might not understand that nuance, but it's distinctly different audiences and skill sets that are unique to those roles.
So one, love the birdcage reference there. One of my favorite movies. So that was phenomenal. Love that. Was not expecting it here. Made my day. If we had drinks for this, I'd probably try and break it out myself. But no, on a more serious note, I agree, but to sort of think about it slightly differently. The way I tend to look at it is, how big is this size? Is this more of an SMB deal or an enterprise deal? And how many stakeholders are involved to get this deal done? Because if it's more of a commercial deal and you don't need that many stakeholders, there's really no reason why an AE can't take that from beginning to end. But if you're either more enterprise, or an enterprise tends to have a much larger buying committee, you don't want the AE spending time to nurture every single stakeholder, build all of those relationships. So, I think it does depend. I do think we are going to see a higher threshold for when XDRs are used. I do think AEs are, going to more frequently being asked to prospect themselves. But, again, I agree with Brandy. I don't think that it's the greatest use of their time when it's a huge buying committee. That's when you're going to really need an XDR. But yeah, prospecting, probably one of the least favorite activities of AE after filling in Salesforce or whatnot. This is going to be more of their role. But again, this is where AI is going to help them by doing so much more of that research for them. But yeah, it's coming their way, especially for smaller deals with a smaller buying committee.
But it'd be interesting from a sales perspective to hear this, right? Because all your AEs are telling your BDRs, SDRs that the stuff you're giving them is no good. and they're technically doing all the qualification for everything else there, and they're the ones that are, we won't go into canceling one that you gave them and then they're opening their own, but there is kind of a two-way street on this one, right? Where they're saying they do that work, and I personally agree with you. I think that work up at top, it's a very specific skill, but what is there a nuance to it that's going to push it over? Because it's like, I see the point with it, but when you're getting all these companies are saying I could just give it to the seller, and the seller should be able to do this because it's technically their job. How do you bridge that gap and get these AI tools in, or convince people to supplement a BDR to let a BDR do more for them? Because it sounds like there's a lot more a BDR SDR could do to help a seller rather than just giving it to the AE, is what you guys are saying.
In a perfect world, Seth, that's the evolution of the BDR SDR role. My fear is that a lot of sales leaders who have been playing the activity arms race and just trying to send more and more and more and more, my fear is that they see the capabilities of AI and they're like, great, instead of sending 1,000 emails a day, I can send 10,000 emails a day. Go for it, SDR. Create 1,000 different email outboxes and do whatever you can to blast all these people. If that is the way we go, that is a major mistake. But what's happened over the years is there's this enormous skill gap that gets created between an SDR and an AE. Why? Because we are having the SDR just do the below the line research-oriented numbers game stuff. They're not actually learning how to sell. With AI, they will have a lot more time because we're taking off their plate a lot of what we've already talked about, the research, the synthesis, all the rest. What are you going to do with that time? If your answer is send more emails, you will fail. If your answer is train the team, upskill the team so that they can actually be more involved beyond creating the meeting, they can be involved in the qualification process, that closes the skill gap for an SDR. So you have a ready-made bench of AE talent when the time is available. And it creates a better buying experience because you're keeping a human in the loop and you're doing the multi-threading and you're keeping deals alive. You're doing the right things. So that to me is the right approach. It's hard though, to your point. Like implementing any process is hard. It takes somebody A, who knows the process, and B, can actually make the process happen, whether that's codified in an AI solution or whether it's enablement and training and upskilling that you do. And that's the job of the sales leader. That's the job of the go-to-market leadership team, to go and do all those things and make sure that you can increase the span of control for everybody on your team, because they can and should be higher leverage now. That is how you will drive efficiency. That is how you will drive productivity. That is how you will drive results. So that's my general take on things.
Sense?
Yeah.
Anyone else have?
I think we're living in a world where being a BDR today is the hardest progression to get to an AE. I think before it was not easy, but you were set up for success more. I think to Kyle's point is like, you've almost get dropped into a system or a process now where you're just like kind of taking the strokes, right? You're sending your emails, you're making your calls, and you've kind of been removed from the discovery process, the qualification process, because someone did some math and figured out if someone sends this many emails, they'll get to their number for the year. So I think it's really, really hard to be a BDR today because they're not getting that investment and enablement of how do I qualify? How do I run discovery? And when the time comes for promotion, there's too much of a skill gap and it makes more sense to look externally. So I'm a firm believer that the BDRs, I know it's away from AI a little bit, but should be involved in this qualification discovery process. Like first for career development, like giving them the exposure to that you are investing in them, you're investing in their career, you want to see them rise through the ranks, you want to see them become an AE, which I think a lot of BDRs today are scared that it might not happen for them because you're seeing at a lot of these bigger companies that it's not happening. So I think using AI to create more time and for an AE or for BDR to learn and spend more time on that qualification piece is massive.
And I'd say not even just the BDR, but even AEs, because one of the areas where I see salespeople struggle the most in their career is the recently promoted BDR to AE, go, have fun. And yes, they have a manager, but I think one of the hardest things about sales leaders is so often as a sales leader gets promoted because they were a great closer themselves or a great prospector, not because they're great at strategy, not because they're great at coaching. Not that they're great at buying technology, not that these things can't get taught, but being an AE, just because you're suddenly an AE doesn't mean that you know everything. and nor that your education should change. Maybe you're now going up market, a different industry. So yes, absolutely coaching for the BDR, but something, I can get on a soapbox and talk about all the time is, throwing AEs, expecting them to be successful with no coaching. And there's so much on their plates. I understand how it gets put to the wayside. But if I have, two dreams I have a lot of dream for AIs, but my two personal ones is a better grammar and spelling. That would, maybe not make the world a better place, but would certainly make a lot of people happy. And then the coaching side of it. I should have probably led with coaching, but the grammar and spelling one is just one of my own weird things.
So let me kind of button this up, because basically what I'm hearing is I think this does tie back to AI. What I'm hearing from you guys is people are still important, of critical importance. It's actually going to be better for the buyer, because now instead of some person hitting a button or sending out mass emails and trying to spam you to death and hoping that the numbers work to be able to get back, you're going to actually have to have a quality interaction with this group. And by the way, you'll have tools that will help you have better grammar and create better messaging, that you'll be able to have an interaction that a buyer would value more, which in return would allow you to shift that BDR, SDR into a level of employee that could potentially shift into an AE role much more seamlessly as they grow and progress in the business. So win, win, win as you go through this. It's not that just buy my tool and let the AI do it, but it sounds like a pretty big deal if you do this right.
And not just good for them, as a buyer of technology, there's so much good tech that I am not learning about because of the bad prospect emails I get. If I could declare email bankruptcy, I would. And almost every email that I get has something along like, people in your position care about generating more revenue. We might have kids listening, so I'm not going to say no, but yeah, of course. And so I am not learning about things that could in fact solve problems that I had. So if I had more personal outreach, it's like, hey, I saw you were hiring more, or I saw, being able to put together the pieces, I wouldn't have the FOMO that I'm actually missing out on things that in fact could help me, but just the generic spray and pray has me, pressing delete.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. So one thing I'd like to do, you guys could think about what's the one really cool piece of AI tech that you think people would get tons of value from. If you can think of one, I'd be interested in. And by the way, what you guys are, what you're using, what you're seeing that you think is really cool. Don't go general on me and say, oh, I like summarizing or I like content creation. Something specific that you guys have used or seen that you think is tangibly adding value right now using AI.
We're going to wait for somebody to mention their own product.
It's okay. Totally fine. There's a lot of people.
I'll do exactly that. I like the idea of coaching and assessing, right? So if we think about what we just talked about, right? Being able to take a set of information to properly coach people, to upskill them and bring them to the next level, and then assess them all along the way by capturing things like their core assumptions, the stuff that they wouldn't typically write down, but actually have them do that in a way that enables them to collaborate with whomever is responsible for making sure they actually meet the goal. That to me is an interesting use case of AI.
Yeah, one for me that I actually do a lot of customer calls on is how we use AI internally, which is sales and marketing alignment. How many times, as a marketer, do you roll out a new product launch or a big event, and you want to know if sales is actually talking about it? Guess what? You go into your conversational intelligence, search that topic, you know exactly who's talking about it and exactly who isn't. I also find it's incredibly helpful for competitive intelligence. You hear like, oh, this competitor is coming up all the time and that competitor is coming up all the time. You can go see how many times each one's coming up by industry, by vertical, by segment, and what they're actually saying. These are things that in theory you could do. Actually, no, I don't even know how you would do that individually, but AI allows you to do that at scale. So when marketing has this information, we see what's working, we see what's not working. We take that, we give it back to sales in the way that they want, and they're thrilled And yeah, that's that alignment piece is so, so important and so exciting because it means that what we're putting out is what sales actually wants and will actually use, because no one, creates marketing content for, themselves.
Yeah, I'll double click on that, Ali. One of the coolest use cases that we're doing internally and that we're seeing our customers do is, yes, use Copy AI to codify your account research process, and your SDRs and your AEs all get great account plans, account strategies, wonderful. That data, though, is unstructured data that can and should be used by the marketing team. So now we have, and internally, we have 1,800 named accounts for all of our sellers. We have account plans built for all 1,800 of these accounts. And those come with bespoke sales angles for how we should position Copy AI to sell into these companies. Then we take that same set of sales angles and we use it to create custom landing pages and custom ads and custom content, put that all together in a true account-based marketing type process. So now we have the real air cover from the marketing team. We have the ground troops that are singing the same song, and the buyer experience is totally unified. Because to Ali's point, they're getting the same thing from every touch point that they see from Copy AI. And so this is a very long way of answering your question, Seth. Choose technology that allows you to solve cross-functional use cases across the go-to-market spectrum so that you can create a useful and unified buying experience. And if you focus on that and focus less on, the 3,500 different point solutions that you could bring on, and try and be a bit more unified so that the data is actually talking to each other. And again, data including conversations, like Ali just said, data including unstructured data. Like it's a different way of thinking about things. And that's generative AI capability that frankly we've never had before.
Yeah,
I want to add a little bit to Kyle's point. Certainly, right now, the most adopted Gen AI use case is definitely in the content generation, whether for marketer use or now increasingly in sales adoption. And certainly within ZoomInfo's Copilot, there is built-in AI generated email with human in the loop. The aspect I think, and to your question, Seth, what's the coolest? I think we often overlook, not talked about enough, is related to very early, we talked about how to enable seller. And I think a general trend is signal-based selling, or on the marketing side, it's usually about how do we best leverage intent signals. We see marketers adopting intent-based, whether it's ABM campaign or digital campaign, in a pretty effective fashion. And it's a little bit slower to adopt on the sales side. But AI really is great at synthesize both structured data and unstructured data with so much signals to synthesize them and also provide context when sellers do engage with real humans. And part of that is AI can make the setup for RevOps of setting up, whether it's the target accounts or relevant intense topics that the company should focus on. Initially, I think a lot of companies, when they adopt new technology, that's actually the biggest friction points. They don't even know what intent topics to set up. They don't know who should be their ideal customer profile. With AI, it really enables the RevOps folks to cut through the chase and based on very limited data to guide the users, guide the RevOps folks, setting up those in a very smooth fashion. And that's where we actually see the biggest aha moment from our customers, where it's those kind of below the iceberg AI capabilities, setting up the initial target account list, setting the right intent keyword cluster. And that's, I think, where we probably don't see often, but increasingly, I think people will say, yep, that's where we see the power of AI.
Yeah, and I think from like an automation perspective, you'll see that AEs will be able to become more technical. I have an AE on my team using GPT, Cursor, and Zapier, who's never touched code before. In 4 months, has like his own Python terminal and is like doing all this like really scrappy work, scraping websites, building workflows for himself and for customers. And the fact that you can just open up a Python terminal, run some prompts in GPT, and use Cursor to improve the code. Like, it is crazy that someone who never went to school for data science, he was a fashion major, and in 4 months is like actually building product and workflows. It's insane. So I think you're going to live in a world where every single AE should be able to have their own Python terminal open and run like automations or workflows that make them more efficient and smarter as a seller. I think that's like the coolest application. If you haven't seen Cursor, it's like the craziest thing of all time.
I think it's so funny because what we're talking about is this is more advanced, but it's the same thing that happened in demand gen and marketing. We used to be madmen. We'd show up in actually very fabulous blazers that were colorful. We'd have quippy things. We'd make decks look prettier. We did the clever slogan, stuff like that. The evolution of marketing has become so much more technology and data, and the sense that analytics are now deeply embedded in every role, or it's all vanity, right? So it's kind of like that same evolution, but for those AE and BDRs, where everyone in a sense becomes a technologist by nature because it's baked into their role. You could be AE, SDR, BDR, CS, doesn't matter. Everyone at some point or another, much like we are thinking about, everything is a web company. Now everything will be an AI company. That's that same kind of future state that I see happening, is that the technology becomes an inclusion, not, oh, I have to also do this. It's like, no, it's just an assumption that you would leverage the tools in this way to maximize your efficacy in any given role, even outside of AE and in BDR or SDR. So it's kind of like that evolution is coming for the same way that it did for marketing, where it went from simply design and creative into now you are demand gen, your pipeline velocity, you cross over technology, you're technically working in data analytics. So it's kind of like the language of the role and the complexity of the role changes, but it's a natural adoption for efficacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to end, I think for me, the most important tool right now is the conversation intelligence, for all the reasons that Ali stated, but also just things that it can do. Write me an email, a follow-up email from the conversation we just had, or we talk about coaching, being able to go in and say, what did my rep do right on this call? What steps are left that are needed for this deal to close? Is this deal going to close by this time, right? Like as a VP, I can ask those types of questions, but I can use it, without listening to the whole call. I can read the transcript. I can ask it questions on what the rep did right, what they did wrong, right? So there's just so much with those conversation intelligence tools right now that AI that you can really do. Of course, you have to train it the right way, right? But
yeah, it's obliterated the tyranny of the blank page. That's the first step. Yeah.
So, I mean, hopefully those that are listening to this got to hear from you guys. I think we covered, as we went through this session, a lot of the dangers of trying to rely too much on this. Also, the need for people in it. And then also how these use cases, and if you think through all these use cases, they're all applicable and have been applicable for long periods of time. Don't buy a technology just to solve it with the technology alone, but if you buy it and you implement it with the people that are doing that job, that's what's going to get you the value. That's when if you take this at the qualification level and probably in any other levels, that's what's going to lead to success. Did I summarize that? Basically, you guys with it? All right. Thank you guys very much. Julie?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Seth. Always a pleasure featuring you. Thank you, Kyle, Ray, Dan, Ellie, Jacob, Brandy, and Tisha. And last question, we've seen a lot of questions from the audience, but people are curious, Seth. You're seeing hundreds of different tech solutions, thousands probably over the years. Curious, if you could build one AI tool or use case, what would it be and why?
I build a buyer portal that allowed, instead of having a sales portal or a digital sales room, I'd build a buyer portal. And that allowed all the vendors to come into my portal as a buyer and allowed me to analyze them the way they analyze me. Probably not what sales and marketing would want to hear, but that's the thing. I don't know why nobody's done it, but it's that would be my choice.